So I guess we will get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're really excited to share some information with you all today about the request for proposals that we recently released for implementation technical assistance for grantees to the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program. And we'll be providing some information today about that RFP as well as the process to submit a bid for it. My name is Ina Lupin. I'm the program manager for the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team, which administers the RCC program and will also be managing this contract. And I'm here with three of my colleagues who will be helping to lead this webinar with me. So we'll just do a quick round of intros. So Sarah is going to be talking through a lot of the details in the RFP, the scope of work, and the evaluation criteria. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Sarah Risher. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a program analyst on the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team, and I'm just really thrilled to share this opportunity with you all. And I'll pass it to Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathleen. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm the program associate for the Community Assistance for Climate Equity team. And I'll pass it off to Blake.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Blake Deering. I am the Senior Contracts Manager over the Contracting and Grant Unit here at OPR. And I'm the one who released the request for proposals. And I'll be here to answer any questions or inquiries related to the RFP solicitation.
Great. Thank you all. And then for the attendees to the webinar today, we'd love for you to introduce yourself as well via chat if you'd like, sharing your name, organization, and the region that you work in if you would like, or any other information you'd like to share. And so we also ask that you stay on mute today for the duration of the presentation. You can post questions in the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as many of them as we can during the Q&A portion of the webinar. We're going to start with questions that were submitted in advance of the webinar. We received a few through registration or email in advance, and then we'll move on to questions that you all are asking during the webinar. If you would prefer to ask a question verbally during the Q&A session, you can just raise your hand and we will take you off mute so you can ask your question. And then lastly, for any questions that we don't get to today, we'll be following up with a Q&A document that responds to everything following the webinar. So don't worry if ever we are running out of time, we will make sure to get to everyone's questions. So the next slide, please. I think we'll go through the agenda. We'll start off with just a bit of background on the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program. We'll talk through the purpose of this request for proposals, bidder qualifications, and the scope of work. We'll also walk through the evaluation criteria, the bidder response package, which is kind of all of the components that you all would put together in a proposal, and then we'll have plenty of time, hopefully, at the end for Q&A. Next slide, please. Great. So the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program was created in 2018 through Senator Connie Leva's Senate Bill 1072. We actually only just received funding to implement the program last year. So we're really excited to kick off this first round of the program. The program aims to assist under-resourced communities within a region to help them access statewide, public, and other grants. And it funds cross-sectoral networks of partners in under-resourced communities to help them access funding and help to advance their climate solutions. The program requires the creation of a collaborative stakeholder structure of partners who are working on these two kind of overall buckets of activities. The first is focused on deepening relationships and developing processes, plans, and projects that will drive and sustain climate action. And then there's also a kind of body of work related to strengthening local coordination, leadership, knowledge, skills, and expertise, with a particular focus on increasing access to funding resources for project planning and implementation within under-resourced communities. So next slide, please. Great. And so these are the 4 program objectives for the RCC program, and they're really very central to everything that the grantees will be doing. We're asking that their work plans very much tie to each one of these specific objectives. And so the 4 are developing actionable plans and projects, building social infrastructure, centering community engagement and decision-making, and developing equity-centered processes. There's more information in our guidelines that kind of explains each one of these pieces and how we define it. So we definitely recommend that folks take a look at that if you haven't already. Next slide, please. And so we've released a notice of funding availability for $8.35 million for round 1 of the program. And we anticipate funding probably around 6 to 12 collaboratives across the state, whose awards will range from $500,000 to $1.75 million. And we have a pretty broad eligibility for the program in terms of the partners that are able to come together and put together a regional climate collaborative. So that includes California Native American tribes, community-based organizations, joint powers of authorities, local government agencies, nonprofits and foundations, small businesses. And then there's also kind of this broader bucket around other organizations with a history of providing community-based outreach or technical assistance. So this implementation TA team will have an opportunity to work with a number of different types of organizations. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, we have a ton of resources on our website. We've really worked to create a lot of resources for applicants, but that could be really very helpful for folks who are also proposing on this RFP. So definitely recommend that you all take a look through our program guidelines. We also have some overview webinars that we have posted on the program that the audience for those was generally mostly for RCC grantees, but again, really kind of walks through the program and can help folks better understand how the program works and what the work might entail to engage with the grantees. And then thirdly, we have quite a few application resources that include the application itself and then a number of guidance documents and supporting resources to help folks understand different components of the program. And so that could also be a really great resource for folks who may be bidding on this RFP. So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague Sarah, who's going to be talking about the RFP in a little bit more detail and the activities that TA providers will be carrying out. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ina. And apologies if you see me looking away. I have 2 monitors today. So given the overall intent of the RCC program, the purpose of the implementation technical assistance is first, of course, to help grantees successfully execute their grant agreements and the grant projects. But we're also thinking long-term with this program. And so the purpose is to also help grantees build the capacity, relationships, and systems needed to continue doing this collaborative cross-sectoral work into the future. SGC really sees the collaborative stakeholder structure as an opportunity to build lasting structures and systems that can drive and sustain climate and equity action beyond the 3-year grant term. And so rooted within this purpose, the implementation technical assistance is comprised of the 3 following components. So we have operational activities, and these activities are meant to support grantees developing, refining, and maintaining their collaborative structure, systems, and processes. These activities are also to help foster and sustain partnerships and provide general assistance with grant deliverables and grant activities. The second component of evaluation, we are hoping that the TA providers will provide grantees with an evaluation framework and then assist the grantees in creating and implementing individualized evaluation plans, which will then enable the collaboratives to iteratively assess their progress in advancing the RCC program objectives. And then this third component of peer-to-peer learning, this will be done in collaboration with SGC. So this, bringing the collaboratives together through these quarterly networking and training sessions, which serve as a platform for collective learning and problem solving between grantees throughout the grant term. And across these three components, the TA provider will help grantees to center and advance the program's 4 objectives. So here we have a high-level overview of the scope of work activities. There's 4 main tasks. So the first one is administration, coordination, and quarterly reporting. Task 2 is that TA delivery, which I just touched upon, and I'll circle back to this more in a moment. Task 3 is preparing the draft final report, and task 4 is that final report. So now going back to task 2, TA delivery, and I apologize, my dog is drinking water right behind me. So if you hear that noise, that is her. So yeah, circling back to the TA delivery, I wanted to offer some more of the nuts and bolts for each of these components. So for the operational activities, the TA team will offer a menu of technical assistance services and will work with each grantee to develop a tailored TA plan. And that TA plan will outline which of the services the grantee will receive during the grant term. We do provide that menu of TA services that bidders will incorporate into their proposals. And this menu of TA services includes things like system setup and project management, facilitation, conflict resolution, and general support on grant activities and deliverables. For the evaluation, the TA team will develop an overarching evaluation framework that will ultimately serve as a guide for all collaboratives in conducting their individualized context-specific evaluations. The TA team will also support the collaboratives in tracking, assessing, and communicating their progress and outcomes. We're really looking for an evaluation approach that is iterative, participatory, and responsive to changing conditions, and that will help the collaboratives capture the data they need for the annual reports, as noted on page 13 of the RFP. And this final aspect of or component for peer-to-peer learning, again, this will be implemented in close collaboration with SGC, and it entails 3 different aspects. So first, we have the peer learning sessions for the peer learning team. So each collaborative will develop a peer learning team that is the representative in these peer learning sessions, the representatives for their collaborative. These peer learning sessions will be hosted virtually and quarterly. They range between 1 to 2 hours, and there'll be a mix of TA facilitated trainings, discussions, and networking events, third-party presentations, and then grantee panels to highlight the work that the grantees are doing. The second aspect of the peer-to-peer learning is the creation of affinity group resource hubs, which are online platforms using something like a Microsoft Teams or Google Drive to support resource sharing and virtual peer engagement. And these will be developed based off of the organization types across the collaborative. So we'll have one for local governments, one for tribal, one for tribes, one for community-based organizations, et cetera. So they have that more tailored connection point with folks working in a similar space as them within the broader collaborative. And then finally, the last aspect of the peer-to-peer learning are the 2 in-person convenings. So we have the mid-grant gathering and resource fair and the closing convenings. And both of these are to provide opportunities for networking with state agencies and networking with amongst the collaboratives in person, and then giving them an opportunity and a platform to share their work and the lessons learned. Okay. I forgot I'm the one driving the slides. So now I'll talk about the bidder qualifications. So in our RFP, we outline both required and desired bidder qualifications. And the ones that I am going over today are the required ones. But before doing so, I do want to reiterate the TA provider is assisting collaboratives across the state that are operating at different scales and contexts and within different contexts. And again, supporting them across those 3 implementation components I just described. And so because of this, we are encouraging that respondents follow a team approach for this RFP because there's a lot of requirements here, and we're wanting to see that the proposer collectively possesses these requirements. So I'll walk you all through these now. So we're looking for at least 3 years of experience working with disadvantaged and low-income populations, working with tribal governments and tribal serving organizations, working with local governments, community-based organizations, and other entities to align priorities, engage in community-based planning, support policy change, and/or pursue funding for implementation, 3 years of project management and grant management, and then 3 years developing and implementing project evaluation, utilizing both quantitative and qualitative methods. And then this next half of these qualifications, there's no year requirement associated with these, but what we're looking for from our proposers is having expertise or knowledge of the following. So developing, informing, and/or implementing policy systems and environmental change with coalitions of cross-sector partners, community decision-making processes, knowledge of topics related to collaborative governance, multi-benefit climate projects, and accessing public or private funding, facilitation, conflict resolution, or mediation expertise, public engagement and partnership best practices, local and regional government planning and policy making. And then this last one is history of and current practices and tribal governance, as well as tribal laws, regulations, and policies at the state and federal levels. Okay, and so here we have our evaluation criteria, which is also included on page 18 of the RFP. We are scoring for clarity and organization of the proposal, the approach to the scope of work, budget justification, the work plan and schedule, and the proposer team and experience. As you can see here, we do place a lot of emphasis on the approach to the scope of work and the proposer and team experience. Both have 40 points available. We're looking for an organized project management plan and thoughtful and clearly described methodology and approach to the scope of work. So really wanting to see how you're approaching the TA delivery in particular. And then we also want to understand how the bidder meets the minimum qualifications and if they possess any of the desired skills and experience. I know that was a lot. I packed quite a lot of information in there. So please do ask questions about what I presented on during the Q&A segment. But for now, I'll turn it over to Kathleen to walk us through the bidder response package.
Cool. Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm going to run through the bidder's response package now. So next slide. Awesome. So over here, these are all the components you must include in your proposal. And I'll dive deeper into some of these pieces momentarily. More information is in the RFP as well, especially around formatting requirements. And I do want to note that forgetting to include some of these components could result in disqualification or a loss of points, which is why we are going over these today. We truly do want to be able to consider all responses that are submitted. Next slide, please. Here's what is included in the scope of work. Summary. We are asking for a project summary that is less than a page. Project management plan. A project management structure that includes subcontractors and demonstrates there is a clear project manager to assign tasks and lead a diverse team, if that's how a bidder structures their proposal. Methodology and approach. We want bidders to explain their approach, identifying specific techniques or methodologies, as well as specific admin and operational management expertise. Budget justification. Clearly explain why and how you allocate funds across the tasks. Work plan. The work plan identifying all the tasks, milestones, and deliverables, which include estimated hours for each task and explain the supervision strategy to ensure time. Subcontractors. We also want this for subcontractors. Next slide. Next, we have the qualifications. We are asking for a proof of the minimum qualifications, which were detailed earlier. We want to understand how bidders meet each of the minimum qualifications and to the extent, if any, they may exceed them. Proposers can do this by submitting to applicable documents and work samples as appropriate. Resumes. We'd like to see resumes for everyone on the team, as well as a table that demonstrates how all the minimum qualifications are being met. Lastly, please include 3 reference forms. Next slide, please. Attachment 13 provides a budget template, which bidders can modify to fit their needs. All proposals must include all anticipated costs for the work plan, including identification of position and classification titles that are funded. On these, please don't list names, because if there's any turnover or change in the project team, we would have to do an amendment, and we would like to avoid that if possible. Proposals must include salary rates and fringe benefits, and note that these rates are capped at what you put in your proposal. Operating expenses, travel. Please make sure to look at the Cal HR website that looks at the specific amount of per diem food and hotels. Overhead or indirect costs, those are at a cap of 20%. Cost details for subcontractors must also be included, and any other costs you think might incur. There's also a list of the attachments that you will find on Cal eProcure. I will not go over each one, but I do want to emphasize that the asterisks are the required components. Oh, thank you for changing the slide. The bidder declaration is bolded because of all the attachments. It is the most important. We have had to disqualify proposals in the past due to their omission of this document, so please be careful to ensure that you include it. Yeah, and then like I said earlier, the asterisks are the ones that are the required components of the attachment. Next slide, please. So this is the RFP timeline. And before we jump into the Q&A portion of the webinar, I would like to review this super quick. And as you already know, we released the RFP last week. We have 2 Q&A periods. One is during today's webinar, and we will accept written questions through November 4th. We will post a document with all the answers to the questions we've received iteratively throughout the Q&A period. Proposals are due November 21st. Please be sure to submit your bid before the deadline. We cannot accept late proposals, even if they come in minutes after the deadline. And we plan to post our decision on December 8th. Then we will go through the DGS, the Department of Governmental Services review and approval process with a goal start date of mid-January 2023. And the end of the project is at the end of March 2026. And now I'll turn it back to my colleagues to lead us through the Q&A segment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen. I think, so we'll start off, I think maybe on the next slide, we have some questions that folks submitted previously, and so we can walk through those quickly, and then we'll start to jump in on some of the Q&A questions here. So the first one, is this an opportunity for community-based organizations? Great question. I think that we would love to see community-based organizations put in a bid on this RFP, just making sure that they are, able to have the capacity to do all of the work that that is a part of the scope of work, and also, ensuring that they would be comfortable with working with grantees across the state. I think, we're really would love to encourage a team approach for bidders to kind of be able to bring in different expertise as needed. So it could be that maybe some organizations would work with certain grantees and others would work with other grantees. But anyway, yes, community-based organizations can definitely put in a bid. The second question around the estimated percentage breakdown between the 3 components. This is a great question. I think we don't have a specific percentage breakdown that we are looking for. We're really I think you all are the experts in kind of how this should come together and what would make the most sense for the team that you've put together. I think what might be helpful to say is that the evaluation piece, I think, will be quite a bit of significant work like early on and putting together the evaluation plan and really kind of front loading some of that work, thinking through with each one of the grantees what their evaluation plan will be. The operational activities will probably be, in some cases, maybe there'll be a lot of work in the beginning, in some cases, maybe further on. So it's a little bit, keep in mind also, this is the first round of the program. So we're kind of, I think, trying to figure out what will be, what issues will come up for grantees and what kinds of support they might need. The peer-to-peer learning component in particular is something that SGC will be very involved in. And so I think potentially a little bit less emphasis on that in terms of time. Certainly the TA team would be engaged in the peer-to-peer learning, but would probably be doing a lot more of the coordination pieces and supporting SGC on that. Sarah, I'm curious too if you would have anything to add to that or would want to jump in.
No, I think that was answered that question perfectly. Just really reiterating that SGC will be collaborating on the peer-to-peer learning. We're thinking those will be, like I said earlier, a mix of TA provider-led discussions based off of what they're observing through the operational activities or the evaluation. So those two components of the TA can inform some of what is happening in the peer-to-peer learning space, but also the peer-to-peer learning sessions are an opportunity for us to bring in other state agency experts and partners to kind of present about funding opportunities or state priorities or state processes that are happening. And so that is something that the SGC team can help bring in and coordinate on.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Sarah. Great. So in terms of how do we envision the role of collaboratives in influencing and leading the goals for TA providers in terms of what TA they receive and have access to? Yeah, this is a great question as well. I think that's really, I think very much to kind of our point earlier around not necessarily knowing exactly what collaboratives will need. I think that this will be very much led by collaboratives. We have a list within the RFP of, the sort of menu of services that TA providers would hopefully be able to offer to our grantees. And it'll be kind of a conversation with them and developing a work plan with them to kind of figure out exactly what are the pieces that a specific collaborative would want some support on. Sarah, do you have anything you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add, I think absolutely right with what you just said. In addition is that, we'll be making the grant awards in December. So we'll know by the time the TA team is up, or we're having our kickoff in the new year in January, we'll know who who the grantees are. And so we'll be able to provide the TA provider, that information, they'll see what strategies and projects and who are the partners for each grantee and kind of assess similarities or differences across those that can inform kind of their TA approach, as well as there'll be opportunities to survey or have those conversations, like Ina said, around needs for this TA.
Great. Yeah, totally. Thanks for lifting that piece up as well. So then in terms of developing a learning loop that often requires confidential data collection and learning to build trust and explore failures, this approach may compete with some of the reporting requirements that are focused on outcomes. How do you expect to balance the learning interests of each collaborative and yourself as grant maker? Yeah, so this is a great question. I think, first of all, one piece that we should make sure to clarify is that we're not wanting to collect, confidential or sensitive data as a part of this process. And one thing that we really highlighted in the Regional Climate Collaborative's guidelines is particularly for tribal grantees, wanting to make sure that there's some work around tribal sovereignty and ensuring that we're not asking folks to offer data that they're not comfortable sharing. And so working with the grantees to kind of think through what the evaluation plan is that makes the most sense. We'll obviously want to we do have requirements around providing an annual report that provides kind of an update of what the RCCs are doing and how that's going. And so we will have some pieces that we'll definitely want to be tracking. But I think there is a lot of opportunity to work with grantees to think about, which metrics make sense, which metrics may not make the most sense for certain collaboratives, or they may not feel comfortable sharing certain data. And I think we want to be really receptive to that piece. So to the piece around building trust and exploring failures, our team often works, our work is very focused on capacity building. Capacity building in and of itself, I think, is very much focused on some of these squishier things that can be harder to quantify, like building trust. And so I think, we're not going to be asking that folks, quantify greenhouse gas emissions as a part of, the work that they're doing. This is really going to be trying to think through, how do we find both qualitative and quantitative metrics to be able to, to track progress. And I think also to be figuring out how to create kind of an iterative evaluation process in which grantees can be incorporating some of the lessons learned into the future implementation of their grants. So, wanting to really make sure that this is a beneficial process for grantees. We're not viewing this as kind of a punitive tool to catch our grantees and not, delivering certain things. So, yeah, Sarah, again, I know you've put a lot of thought into evaluation. So just wanted to see if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think also, and Ina, you did just touch on this, RCC, given it's a capacity building program and the emphasis on the collaborative stakeholder structure and our 4 program objectives, a lot of that is process oriented. So what are the processes and systems that the grantees are doing themselves that are setting them up for this to be a long-lasting relationships, working together, making decisions in these new ways that will lead them to equitable outcomes in the future. But also, what are the opportunities for SGC to better, through this learning from the collaboratives, in future rounds of the program? Are there new capacity building programs that we need to consider for eligible activities, or what are future TA opportunities that this learning can inform our thinking around?
Yeah, totally. Great. So then I think this is the last question that we received. So the last one is, do we expect to have at least one collaborative per county? No, we do not. We will have between 6 and 12 grantees. And we will be having a second round of the program, but this implementation TA would just be focused on round 1 grantees. So yeah. It might be helpful also to take a look at the kind of geographic requirements for the program. Collaboratives can cover anywhere between 1 and 7, 1 and 8 contiguous counties, sorry. And so essentially, you may be covering or working with a collaborative that's covering multiple counties, but we don't expect to have one collaborative per county for sure. So let's jump into the Q&A box here. So we have, do teams apply with a collaborative? Or will the TA teams be matched with collaboratives by SGC? Also, is there a separate grant to help collaboratives apply for the RCC? Yeah, lots of great questions. So teams won't apply with a collaborative. You would apply independently. And in terms of being matched with collaboratives, all of the collaboratives that end up getting funded would be supported by this TA team. So, we'll be making awards December 15th and then working with folks to get their grant agreements in place. And so the TA team would work with the folks that SGC selects through that process. And then yeah, so to that extent, yes, would be matched. We would match you with the folks who received grants. But I think that, if the TA team has put together a team and is wanting to split up, certain organizations working with certain grantees and others working with others, I think that's something that SGC and the collaborative team could kind of discuss and work out in terms of a work plan that works best. In terms of a separate grant to help collaboratives apply for RCC, unfortunately, we are not able to offer a grant. We do have application technical assistance, which is hopefully helpful for grantees as they're going through the application process. But yeah, so I think that's this question. Could you please provide some examples of tribal serving organizations? Yeah, so there are a number of different organizations that work with tribes, community-based organizations or statewide organizations that that support tribes in different ways. I guess I want to be careful not to list off specific organizations, because I think we need to be a little bit careful around showing preference or sort of trying to pair folks together. But I will say that we have a LinkedIn hub that has, where folks can network and connect with other organizations that are interested in our bids. So we can drop into the chat the link for that, and you can feel free to join. We let everyone who's interested in joining join, and then you can kind of connect with other folks who might be interested.
I'm actually at perfect timing. I was loading my LinkedIn as you were saying that, so we can drop that in the chat momentarily. Perfect.
Thank you. So the next question is the RFP for a team to provide TA evaluation grantees for all 6 to 12 collaboratives. Yes. So this TA team would be working with all of the collaboratives that are funded in round 1 of the program. How many groups are anticipated to be in each collaborative? Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't have any set number of organizations that have to, so we do have the minimum number of organizations that need to be a part of an RCC are 4 organizations, 1 managing stakeholder with 3 partners. But then we don't have any kind of maximum number. So there are some, we have been through the pre-proposal process, and so we definitely saw some applications that came forward with a ton of partners, some with fewer, but during the pre-proposal nothing was binding. So it could be that teams shift around a little bit, or that partners get added or removed from the full application process. And full applications are supposed to come in on, well, the deadline is October 7th. So we will have a little bit more clarity on, what we're looking at in terms of grantees at that time. Question here around if we'll share the list of webinar participants and contact information. Yes, so I think I responded to that in the answered questions here, so you should hopefully be able to see it. But I think it's maybe worth repeating out loud. So we often, when we have webinars, we will share the list of webinar participants to the extent that folks are comfortable with us sharing that information. And so we'll send out a follow-up email after this asking people to let us know if they're not comfortable with us sharing their name. And that's totally fine. We'll remove you from the list when we send it out. If anyone currently knows that they want to be removed from the list, you can feel free to either send us an email right away or send a direct message in the webinar as well. We can make sure to take you off the list. Slides and recording will be available to review. Yes, certainly the recording. I think we can attach the slides that when we send it out, but we'll probably put the recording also up online as well. So any restriction on RCD involvement or other thoughts? No, I don't think there's a restriction on RCDs being TA providers. I think the one thing to kind of keep in mind is that we don't have a ton of visibility currently on who our grantees will be and what regions they'll be covering. And so wouldn't want a bidder to get into a situation in which they were planning to support a grantee from a certain region, and then we didn't end up getting a grantee. So that's something to take into account, but there's no official, reason that an RCD couldn't apply, especially if they were maybe willing or able to potentially be flexible around the folks that they work with, or had kind of a clear piece of the bid that they were putting together. The RCC program also, RCDs are able to apply as well. So that could also be an interesting opportunity for RCDs who are interested in this kind of work. Does one of the collaborative orgs need to be a government entity? No, we don't have a requirement that there be a public agency as a part of the collaborative. They're certainly eligible for the program, and so it's kind of up to grantees to think through that. We do ask for them to put together diverse collaboratives, and we have some scoring related to that. And so wanting to see, a diversity of types of organizations and kind of issue area focus. And so, for that reason, we have seen quite a few pre-proposals that came through that had, public entities and nonprofits and lots of different types of organizations. But yeah, no requirement there. Will the info on the RCC applicants be shared with TA applicants? This can be very helpful for proposals to have a better sense of size, geography, composition, and collaboratives. Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't think that we are going to be able to share information about the folks who submitted pre-proposals. We didn't kind of let folks know in advance that we did have some requests for that. So we might think about it for round 2, but I think we won't be doing that. And Miriam, it looks like you raised your hand, and I know this is your question. So I don't know if you wanted to clarify something there. Let's see. I think.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Yes.
I might be a little confused about the difference between pre-proposal and what you said. The application deadline is October 7th. So, I mean, as you can imagine, for setting up one of these or proposing, it's just going to be super helpful to know what these collaboratives look like and where they are and capacity. So, what information can we have to help shape our proposal?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially the way that we've set up the application process is that we had a pre-proposal deadline, which was July 15th. It wasn't required. So applicants needed to fill out a pre-proposal if they wanted to receive technical assistance, but we could be receiving full applications from folks, and I believe that we are going to be receiving some from folks that did not submit a pre-proposal. And then we haven't shared out publicly information from those pre-proposals. So unfortunately, I mean, we can maybe do a little bit more thinking internally around what we might be able to offer. I think we might be able to offer some information around like how many pre-proposals we received per region or something like that.
Yeah, I think we might be able to share something like that, and we can talk internally. I think we have some information on the types of organizations that applied. So that could be helpful as well.
And then, so the October 7th deadline, like once that happens, is that able to be public? Just like the list of applications and the composition, like who applied?
Yeah, great question. Let's get back to you on that. I think that's a good question for us to do a little bit of thinking around. We will be we'll be like in application review mode at that point. And so we'll certainly be posting the grantees and a lot of information closer to the time that we make awards in December. But yeah, that's a good question. We'll put some thought into that. Appreciate you flagging that.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Okay. So then we have a question. Are the round one collaboratives grouped in any particular part of the state, or are they scattered geographically? I think this kind of ties in with Miriam's question. We can say, I think that we received applications that covered in the pre-proposal phase, almost all of the counties in the state. And so I think they covered like 57 out of 58 counties. So definitely a lot of applicants coming forward from kind of all over the state. There are some proposals that were covering, 8 counties at once, and others were smaller. So there's that to potentially take into account. But the other thing maybe to say is that this program, as I think we talked about a little bit in the presentation, but this program is really very much focused on under-resourced communities in the state and being able to support them and accessing dollars to be able to bring in infrastructure and be able to support some climate solutions in their communities. And so it's very much, all of the counties of the state are eligible for the program, but they need to be focused on those under-resourced communities. And I think the other piece as well that's a part of the legislation is that the grantees should be coming from areas that haven't received as many climate dollars as other communities. And so that's something that's a little bit tough to kind of like, we don't have specific metrics around like that piece specifically, but there are like certain areas of the state that have definitely struggled to be able to apply for grants. And so that's a piece that that we're certainly going to be taking into account as well. So I know it's a little bit challenging, that piece in particular, but essentially we're really wanting to see applications come forward from the communities of the state that haven't experienced as much investment. And so a lot of the rural communities in the state and a lot of the communities in the state that that are really needing some extra capacity support, I would say, to the extent that that can be helpful for you all. Okay. Next question, will there be interviews with final candidates after the evaluation of the proposals? Yes, so we will be doing interviews with final candidates after we score the proposals. That's something that will be happening internally. We'll have an interagency panel that will be interviewing candidates. So that won't be something that the TA team would be engaged in, but that certainly is part of the selection process. Next, we have, does the application need to identify the specific collaboration you will work with, or can you identify multiple potential groups you will recruit? So I'm not sure if this question is focused on sort of the TA team. We'll definitely want to see who the TA team is and who the, you know, the lead and sub contractors would be who are on the team. But yeah, I think we wouldn't need for you to be able to select like a specific collaborative that you would be interested in working with. That's something that would happen once we select the collaboratives. I also saw that Alyssa raised their hand, so I'm not sure if you were wanting to add any more context to this question. Let's see if I can bring up, or maybe they put their hand down. Oh no, okay. Alyssa, I think I'm unmuting you.
Yes, hello, thank you. So I just want to clarify, I asked the previous question about interviews, and I just wanted to clarify, I'm curious about this RFP process and whether you would be conducting interviews with final candidates for the TA provider.
Yes, great. Sorry. Thank you. That makes sense. So we won't be doing interviews. We will be, you know, scoring based on what's included in the bid proposals that are sent in. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Hey, I also wanted to just flag that we do have our contract expert extraordinaire, Blake, on the line. If there are any more of the technical contract RFP submission type of related questions.
Yeah, I can jump in because I actually need to get ready for my next meeting. But I did notice in the RFP, so there is one typo in the key dates table. It says the anticipated start date is January of 2022. So that should say 2023 actually. And then I saw that Sarah did put in the chat that there is an indirect cost rate of 20% that's capped. And Kathleen had already flagged that there is an attachment that all those attachments that have asterisks next to them may or may not be required. I believe all the ones that do have the asterisk are required. Just look at attachment 2 from the RFP posting. So there's a total of I believe 22 total attachments. So the slide that was in the PowerPoint was probably outdated. I think it was only showing 15, but there is a total of 22 attachments. And there's a brief description in attachment 2. Attachment 2 is really the instructions on how to respond to this RFP solicitation. It'll brief on page 5 and 6. It'll brief on what those attachments are and whether or not it's required. Another thing I did want to touch on is this RFP is not requiring any small business or DVBE participation. That's indicated there on the first page. However, you can earn additional points during the scoring phase if you do have participation by those types of entities. So if you are partnering and have subcontractors that are certified with the Department of General Services, if they're certified as a small business or they're certified as a disabled veteran business enterprise, you can potentially get additional scoring points during the evaluation phase. And I know there was some questions that were circulating regarding interviews with candidates. This is an RFP secondary method, and for the secondary method, it's just based on how they score. So we do take into consideration the cost of your proposal, but what outweighs that is the quality of your proposal, your work plan, the strategic guide that you put together with your team and who you're partnering with, and how you're approaching this scope of work is really where you're going to get the bulk of your points. And so after we close out the deadline for proposals, we will be scheduling an evaluation phase where we collectively come together and then have a team of 5 or 6 of us where we evaluate for all the proposals that came in, and collectively score against each one of those proposals. So it can take anywhere from a 3-hour meeting to a couple of days to evaluate, depending on how many proposals are responding to this solicitation. So that's why in that key dates table, it's kind of a range of when we anticipate that evaluation to occur. I also do want to note that after we finish the evaluation and we're getting ready to make an award, there are certain waiting phases. There's a notice of intent period. There's also the period where it's going to go for DGS for their final review and approval. And I just wanted to flag that around December, we're around the holidays, so things could get backed up. So that's why a lot of these dates, they're estimated and anticipated timeframes. But yeah, please do pay attention to all the attachments that are listed out in attachment 2, and then do submit your proposal by that actual deadline. I've had proposals that have came in like seconds after the deadline, and I legally have to decline those. So please try and make sure that you get it in before November 21st. I know we're getting close to that's Thanksgiving week. So try to get those in as soon as you can, because as soon as 5 o'clock hits, I have to close it out and I cannot accept any other proposals. And if any of those attachments were the most important, I would say your budget and your bidders declaration are the most key important attachments. There are a handful that I could accept after the deadline, but there are many of them which I cannot. So if you have any contracting related questions or inquiries, there's an email box at the top of the RFP solicitation. It's contracts@sgc.ca.gov. You could submit all your questions and inquiries there. I'll be the one responding to them. And as far as the questions that were asked today, we will track those and release. When we revise the RFP, we're going to release the revised version of the RFP as well as a Q&A. And we'll probably periodically release another Q&A as we get more questions in, just for providing clarity for everyone. So I do have to jump, but thank you all for attending this webinar, and thank you to Ina, Kathleen, and Sarah for hosting it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Blake. That was a great wealth of information. So really appreciate you being here.
Sure.
Okay, we have 2 questions. I think we have a few more minutes to answer them. I know we're at time, but I do want to answer these because it seems like there is some confusion between the RCC grant program and then the implementation. So I don't know if Ina, you wanted to help explain that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So essentially this RFP is to help us bring on technical assistance providers who will help the grantees implement their grants. So they're definitely very much linked, but they're separate. And one thing that's important to note is that because the folks who are bidding on this proposal and the TA providers that we will have in the end will be supporting the grantees. We can't have grantees bidding on this proposal. So that's one thing that probably should have mentioned earlier, but if there are any folks who have applied for RCC, this wouldn't be a good fit for them in terms of bidding on this RFP. But so the Regional Climate Collaboratives Program is the one that has the October deadline of October 7th. That's when the grantees will be submitting their grant proposals, and we'll start our review process. And then the deadline for for folks to put in this bid to be implementation TA providers is the November 21st deadline. So hoping that that can offer a little bit more clarity. I think also as folks look through the scope of work in a little bit more detail, that will hopefully become a little bit clearer as well. And yeah, and looking at all the materials that we have on our website about the Regional Climate Collaboratives program might also kind of help with some of those pieces. Are there any other questions? I think that addresses hopefully both of the questions that we have in here. And then I did see that we had some questions that came through in the chat. I know that we're at time, but wanting to just make sure that we didn't miss anything important in here. One piece that we did want to just clarify is that I think the slide said that the indirect cost rate was 25%, but it actually is 20%. So that's one thing to keep in mind. We will, as I said, we'll be posting a Q&A document that includes all of this information, and we'll make sure to include all of that. And we'll also talk with Blake about whether we would need to amend the proposal that or the RFP that we sent out just to update some of those pieces. So let's see. Looking at the time and seeing that there are quite a few questions in here. Let's see if there are any. It seems like a lot of folks that have questions around networking.
I think that the one question maybe we can answer, the final question is around the budget. What can that include? Equipment costs?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, the budget for this proposal itself would include equipment like machinery. I think you can take a look through the information that we have around the budget as a part of the RFP. A lot of the focus will be on staff costs and on supporting folks through their grant process. Sarah, I don't know if you remember if there were any other like eligible cost pieces that we would have included.
What you just said is what I remember, but we will again add more information. We'll put this in our Q&A and elaborate on that response. But yeah, I don't believe we included equipment cost as part of that.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining and for all of your great questions. And we will be following up with a Q&A document that kind of provides a little bit more information. We'll also have a follow-up email where we'll be sending the recording and the slides and kind of asking to see if folks would like for us to share their contact information or not. But yeah, really appreciate you all joining, and I'm glad to see some interest in this request for proposals. So thank you, and please do feel free to reach out with any additional questions to the email address that I'm putting in the chat right now, ta@sgc.ca.gov. Oh, sorry, I just realized I didn't send that to everyone. And so you can contact us via that email address, and we'll be happy to respond to any additional questions that may be coming up for you. So thanks again, and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone.